Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope y'all got fed and are ready to get back at it. We have a terrific group of people this afternoon, and I think we'll really get to um, hear some interesting information that we can all take back to our workplace. Our panel this afternoon is HR best practices in the print workplace, and it's going to be moderated by Adrian Harrison of Printing United Alliance. Adrian is an experienced human resource professional with an extensive background in business law and nonprofit sectors. She practiced law for 15 years and now heads the human relations department for the printing industry, or Printing United Alliance, the National Trade Association for Print Industry based in Pennsylvania. Adrian holds an undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and a law degree from DePaul University in Chicago. She's going to talk for a little bit, but her panelists, I'm just going to let you know who they are. It's Erin Helly, Senior HR Specialist at Myers Printing Company, Monica Narvez, attorney at Estes Thorne and Carr, Julie Roman, VP of Human Resources at Smythe Company, and Missy Wingy, Director of HR at Sea Change Print Innovations. I'm sorry if I butchered any names. I will pass it over to Adrian right now.
Hi, everybody. This is really a great panel because every single person on this panel is smarter than me, which is really makes my job much easier. And they have real world experience in facilities that are likely to be much like the ones that you're in right now. And so we are here to help with best practices to the degree possible. We do have a chat function and really encourage you to engage, ask questions of myself or the panel, and we'll do a group think on your question and get you the best answer possible to follow up. We met, excuse me, last week as part of our planning for this because best practices needs to be narrowed down to a manageable 1 hour slot to see what we could talk about and what was most pressing. And we took all of our experiences of what I'm being asked about and what everybody else is being asked about or has to deal with in their facility. And we came up with 3 topics that we want to address today. The first one we're going to talk about is managing employee stress and school issues, which are a big part of some of the stress experienced by our employees. And I'm willing to bet if you're an HR professional or a company president, you are experiencing stress related to scheduling and how to cover for the cost of having your people out. So that's one. The second thing we're going to talk about is drug screening and managing drugs in the workplace. Now, this isn't a new topic and it's not unique to COVID, but best practices here are really important, and in no small part because the incidence of drug use is increasing during this period of time of high stress and isolation. And so we will see, if you're not seeing more drug issues in your workplace, you may well see them soon. And then the third topic is continuous improvement and the pandemic and how to recover using CI principles. So continuous improvement is a movement that was started 30, 40 years ago about always working towards better systems, more efficiency, and greater collaboration between management and staff on reaching solutions that work really well in the workplace. So we're going to cover those 3 topics. In addition to that, we have some surveys that we came up with. And the very first one, I think Steve is behind the scenes going to deploy it. And it actually doesn't have to do with our topics, but it's an item of curiosity based on an earlier speaker. We would like to know if you guys have a diversity or hiring initiative or practice that you're following. So this is a survey that we're very interested in knowing if that exists. And then that'll be part of the information that Steve's group uses to jump off and work on that. So, gosh, I even have it. So there you go. So you just click a thing, hit submit. Once you click a response and hit submit, it goes right in and gets added to the count. And without further ado, and you don't have to listen to me talk the whole time, let's talk about managing school issues and employee stress. So I think what people are facing now is a lot of, situations where either there's complete remote learning from home, or there's a hybrid situation where students are in school part of the time and at home part of the time. I actually have not heard about schools that are in full-time 100%, but I'm sure that exists in places. It's just, I'm not hearing about those. And so let's talk about, there's the result of the poll. 77% do not have hiring initiatives, diversity hiring initiatives or practice. So I think that's a sign that we can all improve in that area. But anyway, so let's jump in and talk, my panel, about how are you guys managing some of your situations with employees who are out due to school issues and also employee stress generally. And I know that Julie is with a company that is very large and so is not required to work under the FFCRA, does not qualify. The rest, Missy and Aaron's, do fall into that FFCRA group. And then Monica is an attorney in Texas who advises their clients about this stuff. So jumping in, Missy, speak for the big companies that have a lot of employees and therefore a lot of employee stress issues as well as scheduling issues related to students. How are you guys managing these situations?
So I think right from the beginning, we have a COVID response team. So we started meeting very, very early on with a really broad base of management so we could cover all of our groups, because each function probably had a different need if somebody was going to be out, and each area had different areas that we could kind of contain people. We had some people we could send at home, some people that we could keep on site. So it's been a little bit different. Some of the people who've been at home, we've made sure that we've always used Zoom videos so we could keep that face-to-face contact. We could see how people were doing through their interactions, facial expressions, things like that, just to make sure we were staying connected to those that were remote. I think that made a big difference. As far as right now that we're going back to school, it's a little bit different than it was in the spring. At spring, we were very reactive. It felt like kind of guide and Mercury. Each situation seemed like its own unique situation. And now we've kind of got things under place, like we've got backup plans, who's going to back who up. Different people maybe have cross-trained a little bit differently to relieve some of that pressure. And we've also been able to accommodate who can be at home, who can be away, splitting some departments. So it's a little bit more flexibility that we have now to be able to react to people. So if one person possibly needs to be home with their family, we've got somebody else who could maybe step up. So as a whole, communication has probably been the most important thing. And then also with the size of us, we know our employees kind of intimately. So getting ahead of things, getting ahead of like, hey, how are you doing? How's your school? How are your kids doing? What are your stressors do you think you're going to be? And really the one-on-ones that our managers have with our employees is a huge help, because we can get further ahead of what kind of we anticipate could happen. Not knowing when someone's going to get COVID or be related to that, but it just helps you plan a better solid foundation for what you could or couldn't do.
Missy, can you share with us how many employees are there at your company?
Right now we have about 150 employees. 130 are full-time and the others are part-time. One of the things that has been kind of a difficult thing for us is that we made the decision early on not to have temps from outside agencies for a while, just to really protect our employees and really coach people. How do you need to take care of yourself, and how are we going to take care of each other in that important relationship? That's probably been one of the hardest things for us, is not having those temps to fall back on. And that's something we're looking at. How do we bring temps in with the same commitment to health and safety and our business?
Yeah, interesting. What about you, Julie? And you're with a company that has more than 500 employees. How are you managing this situation?
Yeah, we have about 575 employees across 9 locations. So it hasn't it's affected each one of the facilities differently each time. It's been interesting. You know, we've done a tremendous amount around communication, getting the leadership lined up, getting some practices in play, you know, really trying to keep that open dialogue with our employees. If you had asked us a year and a half ago if we had the capability of going remote, and the answer would have been no. But we deployed a remote strategy and got everybody out of the building as quickly as we could related to that, to allow the production teams to focus and stay focused on their work. In the smaller facilities, we have struggled a little bit when we have an impact of COVID. You know, the good news is we've only had 11 confirmed cases across 575 employees. So it's been a small number, if you will, but it's only impacted 3 of our facilities: our Boston facility, our Green Bay facility, and our Phoenix. And at those times, it was taking 3, 4, 5 people out at a time. You know, Boston, a little more difficult, but it's a bigger facility. So we've done a tremendous amount around cross-training as well. We've even gotten to the point we've done some shift changes to get our ability to lessen the load at certain times, or even switching of shifts for our employees, just staying flexible in the space. So, but it's been a journey. It's hard.
I'm interested in following up on the shift change, and then I want to get to Aaron and hear his perspective. On the shift changes, has anybody here tried doing like a short shift, like a 4-hour, scheduling in 4-hour blocks, or have you just moved the times of your shifts to accommodate school scheduling?
Yeah, we haven't gotten that creative, but when I heard that this morning, I thought that was an interesting tactic. We've actually shortened one of our shifts. So we went to a 10-hour and a 12-hour so that you could stretch it over 4 days versus 3 days and 3 days. And it was more so to allow people that flexibility. Even if they need to come in later, they have the capability to push it back.
Yeah.
We'll see. That's just going to start to roll out here. But that conversation this morning, that was very interesting, of shortening it up to 6 hours and having that flexibility for folks, and even creating, we've talked about it, we haven't done it, as job share. How do you maybe take 2 parents and kind of mix them up so that they can alternate whenever their flex days are? So there's some creative ideas out there. We just got to latch on to.
Aaron, what about you? How are you guys managing? And also, can you share the number of employees that work in your company?
Sure. At Myers, we have 1 location in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, and we've had about 200 employees all along. We've had to unfortunately let some folks go since the inception of the pandemic. So we're about 175 right now, all full-time. We don't have any part-time employees. We also typically rely on temp service a lot, but since the pandemic, we've gone to almost no temps. Occasionally we've had to bring a few in. That's one thing we're doing to try to limit exposure. Specifically to the question around, you know, school-age children, when this all started and, you know, the FFCRA was coming out, and we were I personally was kind of bracing for, you know, a real problem with just people needing to be out. Surprisingly, I got to learn a lot about people's personal lives and family situations. And, you know, the office employees, most all those folks went remotely, which was new to us, as I'm sure many of us on this call, new to our culture, but we found a way to make that happen, which largely solved the problem with those children. The production folks, what I learned was that most of our folks kind of had a plan in place. So if there's 2 spouses, 2 parents, one's already working a different shift, and they're able to cover a lot of those kids. So we only have, since, you know, this started, we've only had just a handful of employees that needed some exceptions to watch their children. So, you know, the EFMLA has been, you know, really, really helpful for us. So, and our supervisors, of course, have been very supportive in making sure people can go when they need to, you know, and most of those employees that are taking that EFMLA at 2/3 pay are supplementing that with their PTO. Now, the problem is some of those folks now have already exhausted that, right? Because at the end of last school year, they burned a bunch of it, and now they're into this school year, and they're totally exhausted. So one thing that we have done for those folks that no longer qualify, they burned all 12 weeks of their EFMLA, we have issued furlough for some of those folks that have supplied us documentation that, hey, my child is hybrid, this is their schedule, or their distance, this is their schedule. And there's no way for them to come to work. They have to be home, and there's no way to get them paid. So we have issued furlough for some of those situations, and we're watching them closely. We're communicating with those folks every 2 weeks. We're checking in with them just to kind of understand what's going on in their school district. Adrian, you mentioned, you haven't heard a lot of districts that are full-time in person. Myself, our family, we have 3 kids, 3, 5, and 8. So we got a kindergartner and a 3rd grader this year, and they're, thankfully for us, they're in person 5 days a week right now.
Wow.
So, which is awesome for us, right? So I'm working here. There's no kids at home. It's great. And our 3-year-olds at daycare. But the thing about that is there's a seriously heightened sense of caution around any kind of symptoms, right? As all of us have in the workplace, it's even more so at school because they have so much planning, time, energy, resources, money wrapped up in having the school open that if there's even a sniffle, a runny nose, they're home for 2 weeks unless they have a negative COVID test and no symptoms. So it's great to have them there, but we're walking on such thin ice, as many of us are at work as well, that we could instantly be stuck with the kid at home for 2 weeks. So that we're just kind of holding our breath in that regard, but it's always interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's, and I want to get to Monica and see what her clients are needing and her recommendations on that. But I also want to say that for when, a situation like Aaron's in, or lots of parents who are working remotely, but they have kids at home, I want to get to the point where we talk about the stress of juggling those 2 things, right? Where you're working and you're also trying to help a small child who doesn't know how to log on to Zoom, take classes online and do online learning. I think there's some real stress involved with that and getting all of your work done, and how you guys are working with your employees or communicating with your employees to let them know, what kind of support you're offering them, whether it's just moral support or other support. But Monica, share with us, you're a practicing attorney and have clients who are trying to juggle this act here. It's crazy. What can you tell us about your experience?
Let's see. It's funny. It's all over the board right now for me, and mostly what I'm getting now is preparing for what we think is going to be the onslaught as the flu and cold season ramps back up, and then they're going to shut schools down again.
Right, and it's like what Aaron said, whether it's a sniffly nose, nobody knows whether that's COVID right away or not, but everybody's getting sent home.
Yeah, so I have a lot of my clients, or the new clients that I'm getting, are the ones that are smaller, so they're the under 50s, and they want to figure out how they can make themselves exempt, right? So, or, which is, not super easy, but when you're pretty small, and there's a lot of them that you can't qualify for that. Or I'm getting the opposite, in that they're so small, but they need to stay open. They don't necessarily want to be exempt because they want their people to have a job and they want them to come back to it. So how do they make it work? And it's a lot of what's already been discussed, of half days, intermittent leave, trying to work in a spouse, and a lot of it is educating the clients on what the act actually says, because even though there's a lot of information out there, people think that they get the 10 weeks for whatever, and no, it's just if the school is closed, and only on the days that the school is closed, and things of that nature. And then it also is if you can't work from home and you don't have anybody else that can step in and provide care, right? So you've got all these different levels of questions that are being now asked, and then you get the fine line of, well, I don't want to ask their personal situation, but you have to, because if there's say it's one of the spouses is always stay at home, why would the spouse that works have to be home, right? Well, you wouldn't know that unless you asked. Or early on, I had a lot of clients that had employees that were just flat out lying and saying that their daycare was closed, and it really wasn't. So there was some pushback on that. But the biggest thing is trying to figure out how to get the employees to actually be able to work from home in some capacity. so that even if it's maybe not a full 8 hours of work, it's something. And because of this whole dynamic of the unemployment that's going on, there's a lot of people that want to be laid off or furloughed because they want the unemployment. And you know, what's that? That doesn't help really anybody. So it's really all over the board, but really what it is just a lot of questions from me to the client and the client to the employee, and then trying to come up with the most creative solution possible. I would say overall, it's not helpful because it's a bad situation, but everybody's stressed to their back teeth, right? And so everybody understands it's not just the employees saying, oh, the managers don't understand what I'm going through. Well, no, the managers really do understand what you're going through, right? Because everybody's under this horrible pandemic. So I would say that yes, it is stressful, but it's helpful that everybody's going through the same thing and everybody has sort of a common ground. That's one thing that I have found. Because everybody can joke about Zoom and only wearing a dressy top and not, you know, that helps in the stress side of things. So you try to work that into as much as possible.
So, you know, because our panel is called Best Practices, I want to distill a little bit then of what we all talked about into maybe a couple of best practices as we try to navigate this crazy scheduling side of this issue, which would be, to Monica's point, ask a lot of questions, right? You need to ask questions about situations and tread sometimes where you might not want to go, but you know, asking about the availability of other people to watch children. And I'm going to mention a couple of things that I'm aware of. So there are some neighborhood parent pods that have been created that your employees may not have explored, but you could look into offering a pod template that they could use with their neighborhood, where one parent, like 3 families pod together, so the exposure is limited, and one day one parent is in charge of, let's say, 5 kids. The next day it's a different parent in charge of 5 kids, so that the kids, it's spread out each day, it's a different parent, your kid's covered every day, but you're only out of work one day. And that's a much easier scheduling thing for work. It doesn't cost you as much income, things like that. So a parent pod is an option to manage scheduling. We have heard about, and I don't know that any of our people on the panel or out in the listener land have done, but there is a small movement, and I will underline small, to add a person that comes into your workplace and supervises kids who are doing remote learning. So you have a designated area like a conference room, a large space where kids can be distanced, and then they have a learning support person in the room. The parent is out working, the learning support person is helping the children remote learn, and the children go home when their parent goes home. So there are models out there on that as well. So those are 2 suggestions. But barring that, you want to ask questions. You want to consider changing up your shift schedule, shortening your shifts. I have spoken at length prior to a pandemic about flexibility in the workplace being a real driver for the future, because people are gig employees. They don't necessarily want to be gig employees. What they want is the freedom and more time. So considering having a 6-hour or a 4-hour shift modules where people can sign up and do a scheduling based on shorter shift schedules, or moving shift times to accommodate school schedules. Those are all options that I'm hearing in a best practices. Is there anything else anybody wants to pitch out there as a best practice on the scheduling side of managing employee stress? And HR person stress. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's important to consider is just having a variety of schedules, but also keeping the fact that having our production up and running for a certain amount of time is our end goal. So it's really finding that perfect mix of what can accommodate the employees and their families, and also accommodate our customers and the work flow that we have to get out. We do have more schedule options than we used to have right now. In the last 6 months, we've developed some more 12s, which we didn't have before. Some people like those. That way they can, have one family at work, or one member of their family at work on the front half of the week and one member of their family at work on the back half of the week. And just trying to find some flexibilities for families and who can they pair off of each other. I think really that open communication that I was talking about earlier is important, really knowing your people. And then with my managers, it's really talking about them with some options that possibly we could work with. But managers who are in production environments aren't always comfortable having these conversations, and that's always a risk. So really making it okay for them to tell them, call me, I'll walk through all these questions with them. We'll try to come up with some options that way, and then we can regroup again. So they don't feel like they have to have the answers, and they might not always know the right questions to ask or how to ask them too. So really having everybody just kind of funnel into one place, so we're gathering the information in the same way and being fair to everybody, I think is something to consider.
Awesome. What about employee stress related to catching COVID-19 and other employee stress issues that maybe always were there, but certainly coming to the forefront? We all know that mental health issues are really exacerbated by the isolation that a lot of people are feeling, as well as the fear, or God help us, there's also conflict between, maskers and anti-maskers, COVIDiots versus, people, you know what I mean? Like everything has become very sensitive, right? Whichever side you fall on, it seems like there's somebody berating or the ability to say that you're wrong. So it's a stressful environment, and I don't know what you all are doing, if anything, to help manage that stress. But if you have suggestions, throw them out here. I'm interested to hear what your best practice is within your building to do that. Here at my company, and what I recommend to people, again, is based on communication. So I think transparency from the top down helps talk about and acknowledge that, hey, this is really hard. We understand how hard it is. If you need time or whatever to get through it, then please, by all means, come talk to us and we'll see what we can do. If you are working with somebody who is antagonistic to your position, come see me and we will see about rejiggering your schedules or where you are in the building, so that you don't have to always encounter somebody who's judging you. Is there anything else that you guys have done?
One thing I will add, this is not, I'm sorry, Arian,
Go ahead, Monica.
I had my first Zoom experience where I'm talking over somebody. The one thing I will add, this is the lawyer putting my hat on, to the extent that you can, because stress claims are being brought under OSHA, and then I presume any applicable state law. Follow the CDC guidance, follow OSHA guidance, follow any health and safety specific, like a health agency for your state, your city, your county, whatever. If hopefully they'll all match. I know they don't, but that would be nice if they did. Follow them as an employer as much as possible, because that's going to be your best defense in a lawsuit, because I do think there's going to be a lot of people that, one, everybody's already stressed out anyway, and the more PPE that you have, and the more you're doing the cleaning, you're doing the everything, it manages the stress a little bit more. And even if it doesn't, for the people that are completely stressed out and file a lawsuit, you can say, look, we did everything we were supposed to do. This person it's not a reasonable expectation. So that would be my best practice for defending the lawsuits that are sure to come. They're already being filed, but ramp up in the beginning of 2021.
Yeah. Aaron?
Yeah, just a couple of things that we've done around just, all the pressures of this pandemic. One is attendance. So particularly for our hourly folks, we've always traditionally been pretty strict on attendance. So if a minute late, it's a ding on attendance record. So what we've done is basically encourage our employees, of course, to let us know what's going on, right? But if you're late because of anything really regarding the pandemic, whether you got somebody that you're checking on, bringing kids to school, whatever's going on, your situation, you know, we're forgiving those attendance situations, so it's not going on their attendance record. And then the other one is with PTO, right? So we changed to a true accrual PTO program 2 years ago. People are still getting used to it, generally accepted. But we have a max, a PTO max, right, of 1 week more or 40 hours more than your annual accrual. And with pandemic, right, people aren't taking vacations. And so people were starting to get concerned, like, hey, you know, I'm going to hit my max and I'm going to miss out on accruals, and which is important to people, right, because they see that PTO as similar to their compensation. It's theirs. It's important. So what we did is we just increased the maximum by an additional week, so people can basically continue to accrue time and not get penalized for not using it at least an additional 40 hours of it at this point. So it seems to have brought some people's stress level down. So something that we're doing.
That's excellent. Yeah, to both of those points, if you are on this, you are probably a member of one of the associations that is hosting PIM or PIA Mid-America, their partner. And that means you are a member of the Printing United Alliance. And as a member of the Alliance, there is a free preparedness and response plan available to you on printing.org, where you can do, all you have to do is plug in some stuff, it'll download, and then it gives you the sanitation practices. It gives you sample policies. It gives you templates to reach out and communicate with your staff. It's either 52 or 54 pages, and I can't remember, and I'm one of the authors, so I should remember, but in any event, that's a resource, to Monica's point, that will guide you through this as a best practice in that response to those things. With regard to Aaron, it's exactly right, Aaron. There is a huge pandemic time bomb happening right here where people are losing PTO. They can't take it because of the pandemic or the school situation or whatever it is. So agreed that really looking into your PTO policies and trying not to violate any kind of laws where accrued unused PTO gets ditched when that's a violation of law, because that could equate to wages. And also to really think about the needs of your staff and put a rule in that allows them to not lose their PTO because it really is a morale crusher. And consider, because some people have experienced economic difficulties, if there's a payout option that your company can handle, you may want to consider offering a payout at the end of the year for some of the accrued unused PTO, which would, I'm sure, be welcomed by some employees who having a little more money to cover the holiday time would be helpful. So those are some things to consider as best practices. And anything more on this, or should we move to drugs? All right, let's go talk about drugs. So drugs in the workplace is not a new topic, as I mentioned at the top of the program. And I do have a lot on this issue, but I'm the moderator, so I'm going to be quiet. But I will tell you that in the resources available to you are two things. And this is where I'm going to do something. I'm going to share my screen, and you're going to tell me if it's not working. And then I'm going to show you a couple things that I have. This first one is a sample impairment and drugs in the workplace policy that is available in the resources tab. And the second one is the checklist of observed employee behavior and evidence of impairment. And I will simply state a couple of things here. Oops, that didn't do it. I'm trying to unshare my screen, but you know, oh, here, stop share. Miraculous. I will tell you that drug use has gone up. 40 states in the United States have reported significant increases in opioid overdoses. So that the opioid problem isn't gone. It might be harder to get hydrocodone and other prescribed opiates, but fentanyl is on the market. Fentanyl is a very strong opiate, much stronger than heroin, and is easily available on the street. And so that is something to look out for in your workplace. Second to that is there's more time at home. People aren't going out more. They seem to be participating more in the recreational marijuana side of things. So you may have more people using marijuana in their own time, but that would show up on a drug test. And then the third thing is that I knew this was coming in Pennsylvania, where I'm located, was the first to announce there's a real push for legalization of recreational marijuana here, and will be in other places, as a way to cover the gap in that the state is experiencing through reduced revenue, through taxes and other things that aren't coming in because of COVID, and expenses put out because of COVID. So if recreational marijuana gets approved and gets on the ballot in more states in the next year, which I would anticipate, you need to be ready for that with drug policies. And I think that we have a poll to put up, which is relevant to this conversation. Does your company screen for marijuana in pre-employment drug testing? So answer, and it's just, this question pertains directly just to marijuana or cannabis screening in pre-employment testing. So go ahead and answer that. And jumping right in, panelists, what is your opinion about including cannabis/marijuana on a pre-employment test screen, and the reasoning for your decision, your company's decision? Aaron, let's start with you.
Sure. So we do include it in our 5-panel drug screen. The reason we do it is because we always have, right? It's in the name of safety is why we screen for drugs at all. We also have some customer limitations or expectations. Here's the poll results, right?
Right, there you go. So it's not quite half, but it's close to half screen.
I'm surprised there's that many that don't. That's really, I'd love to hear from somebody that doesn't screen for it. But here in Minnesota, marijuana is still illegal. And so, we continued up until about a year ago to, kick people out of the process if they came back with positive. But about a year ago, we had a candidate who was just super qualified for the job, great, interviewed really, really well. And then we got to the drug screen and came back positive for marijuana. And I remember sitting down with my boss and the hiring manager, and we're looking at this and we're just hanging our heads. And then our CEO looks up and says, "Well, do we care?" And so that started a conversation. Like, do we really care? In this particular person's role, they weren't working on that customer account where it requires this. They weren't working with any heavy machinery. And so we just made a decision right there to allow that person to come to work. And we amended our screening policy for those situations. And we've hired 2 more people since then that tested positive. Now, we don't just let them come on in, right? I do pump the brakes, and I have a direct conversation with that candidate and telling them, this showed up on your screening. We're not going to disqualify you here, but I need you to understand that it's a drug-free workplace, right? And so you cannot possess it in our building, and you can't be under the influence in our building. And all 3 of them are like, yes, no problem. And it has not been a problem. They've all worked out really great.
All right, so there's somebody who has been very nimble with their drug policy. And so let's hear what others have done. Missy, what about you? Sorry.
I think we definitely do have our pre-screening policy in place, and it relates to our safety as well. It relates to different contracts that we have. I have an experience, not where I currently am at, but I've had experience in our past where when you have somebody under the influence at the workplace, really taking into account when you have to go through and see, are they under the influence? That's what we want people not to be, is under the influence while they're at work. That's the most important part when you think about cannabis too. we don't want somebody under the influence operating a piece of equipment, putting somebody else at risk. When we hire employees, we want them to know that they're safe when they're in the building. So that's the most important part to me. And training managers to recognize somebody who maybe comes in under the influence. If you're going to say, okay, you did have that on your pre-employment screen, we are going to bring you in. We've had the conversation that you can't have it here, that you can't be under the influence, all of those things. How does that manager or the supervisor that's on the floor, if that person does come in under their influence, how do they recognize it? What are the signs that they have to go through? And because it's a perception, right? Multiple people maybe need to take note of what's happened on the floor if that situation comes up. So it's not just one person's perception, giving the supervisors and the manager a comfort level, knowing that they're doing things correctly. So I think that's kind of my take of something that needs to be taken into consideration if that's going to be something that you allow.
I'm going to pop up my share screen again because now I know how to do it, and open up this real quick, which is a checklist of observed behavior and evidence of impairment. The word that we typically use now is impairment, even though I think the actual words of like the drug-free workplace and others is under the influence, but we like to talk about impairment. From a national sort of global, I don't work in a particular printer. I see a lot of printing companies and manufacturing facilities. I would say that impairment is absolutely the key to all of this, because as cannabis becomes legal and as hemp use in CBD oils and other things becomes more common, people are going to test positive even when they are not impaired. Unlike other drugs, both legal and illegal, cannabis is stored in the fat cells. So a person who has used cannabis a couple of weeks ago may still test positive, even though it was weeks ago and they're clearly not impaired. If a person is a little bit fluffy, they might store that longer because they have more fat cells that secrete the cannabis. Whereas somebody who's, a runner that training for a marathon, they probably have low body fat and they won't secrete it as long. So both of them could use at the same time, but then have completely different results on a drug test that would be administered later down the road. So here is this observed employee behavior and evidence of impairment checklist. Now, I've also provided this sample, and what this sample says is that you can be considered impaired if you demonstrate one or more of the characteristics. And this is kind of goes to Missy's point about using common sense and maybe group think a little bit on this. Whereas if you have somebody who is, smells of marijuana, like their odor of marijuana, that might be enough. Or if, there's something over here where they're staggering or can't stand up, that might be enough, just one thing. But if it's other things, like maybe not enough sleep because they were up all night with a sick relative or a baby or something, they might have, they might be tired, they might be a little bit, confused or, lack concentration. You would need several of these different characteristics in order to really think that they are impaired. So there is no one size fits all approach to it, but there is a lot of common sense that has to go with it. But these again are provided to you guys in the resources. So Julie, you have a much bigger operation, and you're I'm sure with 9 facilities you said. Do you have one consistent drug policy for all of your facilities, and do you do pre-employment screening for cannabis?
Yes, we do. Consistent policy and consistent screening across. So, and it is a knockout today. We've had several is probably too strong a word, but we've had quite a few that test positive over the course of years. If you had one hit a month, you'd be surprised across all 9. But I'd say in the last year to 18 months, I can tell you in one of our facilities, I bet you I've had 9 out of 10 that have come back with a positive hit.
Yeah.
Which really dampens your hiring capability when you have it as a knockout.
Right.
And similar to what Aaron mentioned, you know, I got a call from our president who said, do we really, not that I want to stop this by any stretch, because you definitely don't want people running this equipment that are impaired and unable to do so in an effective way and safe way. So he just asked the question, can we do anything different? So hence the conversation has started within the organization. And I think we're contemplating going under that review policy, for lack of language, and determine if it's the right move to make. Is the person the right fit for the organization? Are they right fit for the job? If the answer is all yes, making it very clear that they can't come impaired and they can't be carrying. And that is a terminable offense if that shows.
Yeah, so that, by the way, is in that sample policy. I'm not saying the sample policy I gave is a one size fits all. Everybody's got to customize it, but these principles are all reiterated in that. So our attendees will have something they could look at that sort of reflects what you guys have all talked about. I will say this, when I started in this industry a little over 4 years ago, the number one by a mile issue I had was, how can I hire people? Everybody test positive for cannabis, and it's only gone up from there. And I'll never forget it. And I think I shared this with you guys, the panel earlier, when I had a print owner in the Carolinas say to me, I will hire anybody with a pulse if they can pass a drug test at this point. So I do think, and I have spoken about this at length, and we'll be continuing to speak about it very soon again, providing a lot of information and options to print owners. So it's something to look for down the road. Or maybe some of these people have heard me speak about it. But in any event, I will say this, which is, I do think that absolutely now is the time to really rethink your drug policies in light of the movement forward. But opioids, not a lot changes there. Those cause quite a bit of impairment. A good many, if not most, are illegal. And if you're taking them legally as a prescribed medication after a surgical procedure or something, then you should probably not be coming to work because you are impaired. So opioids, that piece of your policy might stay the same, whereas your cannabis policy maybe uses some rethinking. Monica, your thoughts?
I think my biggest thought is, regardless of whether you do testing or not, I have a mix of clients. Some are just like, I don't even want to know. But then I've got other clients that they do it because they have to, because they have a federal contract or something of that nature, or there's a statute that applies to them. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, is the training of the managers to look for the signs and symptoms of impairment. And because you're going to catch, first of all, even if you have a policy and they come back positive and you just say you can't come impaired, you're still going to have to look for it anyway. But regardless, you probably have, whether you do the pre-employment testing, you're going to have, this is a drug-free workplace policy, right? Now, federal contractors have to have it regardless. I always include it in all my policies that I advise on, just because you want to have that as a tool. But then, so you still have to watch. So you have to watch for impairment. And one thing I will say about the impairment is, and this is me in my government days, always get at least one witness if you can. Now, don't embarrass the person, but make sure you have, if the supervisor notices it, go get somebody that is perceived as being neutral and doesn't have a kind of like they're trying to get this person, because from a lawsuit perspective, it's always better to have a neutral person that you don't look like you were discriminating against the person or retaliating against them. But definitely on the opioid aspect, this is becoming obviously more of a problem, and it's creating other issues, not just impairment in the workplace, but I've had it pop up a couple times where weird behavior, like anger out of nowhere, and or sending text messages of like, hey, I literally had this happen. A client, two employees were texting each other. One was asking the other employee if the other employee's son could help her get a gun because she needed to take care of a business transaction. So it turns out the person was a meth addict, and her boyfriend was a meth dealer, and looking for him to commit a murder. But at the same time, who would have thought that that was a meth thing? At first, the 2 and 2 didn't go together. It just was like, is she just trying to kill people? But no, it was. But I think
so our best practice there would be to recommend no planning of homicides in the workplace. Let me just.
That is the first thing, yes. And tell your employees to say, no, I'm not going to help you get an illegal gun that you can throw in the lake. But at the same time, just good training, providing training for the supervisors, and to look for what might seem like a crazy thing. You're going to identify the drug addiction. And then the last thing that I would say, because I get this a lot, if you do have a drug policy, and you make sure that your employees understand that if they're in rehab, they're covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But as soon as they start using again, they are no longer covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it's surprising how many employees don't know that, and employers. And I think it's an important thing to make sure that the employees know. They're like, look, I'm all for you going to rehab, but as soon as you start using again, you could be terminated because you're not protected. So that would be one word of caution.
Right, and I think that's a good point to make. I'm gonna wrap up a little bit of this in a ribbon here on the best practices point of view, which is when it comes to this conversation about managing the drugs in the workplace. I think Monica's point is really well taken. If an employee tells you I am in rehab, that starts the ADA process. So that's one thing to know. If they haven't said they're in rehab, or if they start using again, the clock is not running. But once they tell you they're in rehab and they're in that rehab process, that's a medical process, and then that is a disability, and that starts the ADA conversation. So keep that in mind. The second thing is to rethink your drug policies in light of marijuana. And third, and perhaps the greatest through line of this conversation, is that impairment is critically important, and training your people on recognizing impairment is really, really important. So I think, does anybody else want to toss any more best practices as it relates to drugs in the workplace?
I have one more thing to add. If you find somebody who's under the impairment and you go through this, to have a plan in place for how you're going to get that employee and what your next steps are, getting them off the premises and getting them home. Like, what's your taxi service? How do you plan that? How do you pay for it? Making it so it's seamless for all the people who are there and respectful of the person you have to have leave the property needs to be part of the training process.
That's right. That's right. Do not hand somebody their keys, or rather just don't send them out of the building. If they're impaired in the workplace, then you can't put them out there to drive themselves home, because if something terrible happens to them or someone else, your company is going to have a gigantic lawsuit, and that's terrible. So thank you, Missy. Yeah, that's an important part to add. So now I need Kristen to pop in, because I'm not sure, do we end in 2 minutes or do we have longer? This is our panel session.
You guys have 30 more minutes. You guys can go till 2:30.
Oh gosh, so there you go. All right, so in my head it was an hour, but it's 90 minutes. All right, so the next thing that we wanted to talk about was recovery, right? Someday this pandemic will end. We all fantasize about it. It will happen, right? But it's not like a bell is gonna toll and all of a sudden, okay, no more pandemic. It's gonna be just an easing, and things will have happened, and we will be in a recovery process for a period of time. So when we were gathering as a panel to discuss the pandemic and issues, part of what became a really important part of it was how we manage the recovery. And our panelists have practiced a series of continuous improvement strategies to put themselves in a great recovery position. And so I'm hoping that you all will bounce in and share your thoughts about how to do that. I think, Julie, you guys said it really made you sharp, right? And Smythe, which had already followed a CI protocol, really got good at it. Can you share your experiences?
Yeah, I don't know if we got good at it per se, but I think we're exercising the muscle a lot more right now. I think it's one of those pieces where for our business, it hit the accelerator. We unfortunately, or fortunately, we're on the best side of this, where more business came our direction and we were bombarded. And so, but what it did with the pandemic and the pieces, it sharpened up your process, because you couldn't, for lack of language, you couldn't point the finger at another portion of the business and say, well, they didn't do this, we didn't do that, you know, whatever. You had to work a very streamlined process to be able to get the execution of the work out the door. So it cleaned up roles, or it identified opportunities where you had confusion in roles prior, because this person has to work in these 6 feet, this person has to work in that 6 feet. If you're crossing over, we've got to clean, you know, so we put so many practices in play to keep the workplace safe that it really identified some spots for us. And so we've kind of, even though it's all been remote, from a doubling down on that perspective, you know, you're kind of doubling down on getting your CI initiatives focused, very directive, and implemented. So it's helped us, I think, in the pandemic. Good, better, and different helped us identify some warts in there that we, you know, maybe glossed over a little bit prior, and got us a little cleaner in how we do the work. We still have plenty of opportunity, don't get me wrong. We're looking at stuff every day, but I think it definitely got us to work a little more streamlined, and got the operation and accountability sharper.
Interesting. Erin, do you guys have a CI practice, and what are your sort of paths to recovery for your company?
Sure. Well, we're kind of at the far opposite spectrum for where Julie is in Smythe. So, and you know, I think a lot of companies are still struggling. Has it made us sharper? I think initially, I think no, but yes, ultimately it has. At Myers, we still have, we've had up to almost 50% of our employees on furlough, and we still have from week to week 10 to 20 people out on furlough. And so when you take people out of, you know, out of the workplace, you have to get creative on how to get the work done, right? Because you still have ship dates to hit, and customers aren't more understanding that, you know, they didn't get what they wanted on time. So
right.
it has made us sharper in that regard, because we've gotten leaner, and you have to work with what you got. We do have a CI department, and they're working, you know, hand in hand with the production managers every day to try to make sure that nothing gets missed. So I think it's good, you know, with this question to kind of reflect on that, because right now we're still just in the throes of this thing, and we're feeling like we're in survival mode, but that is part of what makes you stronger. So we're going to come out of this, I think, with a lot of learnings, and, you know, hopefully we get some more business and we can get you know, everybody back to work. But if not, I think we're figuring out a way to do this.
Excellent. And Missy, do you guys follow a CI sort of philosophy, and how has that affected your decision-making going through this pandemic?
So I think one of the things that I've noticed, the biggest changes are with all of us kind of, we'll call it staying in our lane. Like, I don't need to be in production every day, right? Everybody's got to kind of stay in their own space, keep everybody a little bit more separate than we used to. It leads everybody to communicate better up front, gathering all the information, making sure everything's in the job ticket, making sure more things are done correctly the first time to avoid all that crossover. So I think that's something that I've seen us really do better. Not that we weren't doing it poorly before, but there's a lot of times where maybe one thing got missed, or maybe somebody forgot to put a sample back in the ticket or something like that. And those things people are really much more attentive to right now, which saves you time. Whereas before they'd be like, oh, I left it back over here. Or, you know, there's not as much transfer between departments. That's person to person. So we really have to communicate very well and really follow our SOPs. If they're not right, we've edited them. If there was a, I don't know what you want to call it, like a law of the jungle, like everybody just knows this is how it's always been done. The same people aren't always there as resources because of those shift changes, because of maybe somebody being out, because we're not crossing over in different areas, those kind of things as much as we used to. We really have to be doing things right and getting some of those law of the jungles, making sure they're written down so everybody has the same thing versus one source. Oh, go to him. He always knows how to do this. He's the expert on this customer, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's made us really aware, I think, of the importance of communication. I want to take this opportunity to ask Steve if he would put up our third and final poll, which is a CI poll about your progress. There it is, right where you are in your lean journey, and see if you can share with us your experience. I will say this, this is both a CI concept, but also is just a best practice. Is I think every printer I know has had the jobs of their employees change in some way. Not every employee's job has changed, but some employees' jobs have changed, and some of their work locations have changed, some of their wages and salaries have changed. And so what we have to do, which is super annoying as a HR professional, we need to update the job descriptions. So for instance, this morning, I answered a question from a member that involved an interaction between the lead in her area and herself. All right, so we have results of our poll, which is rolling along steadily. Oh, good. So we have a good number of us are already on the lean process. Some are getting better and some are just starting, but nobody is not doing it. So that's interesting. So it is really, I think, good. And that's a wonderful, surprising a little bit result of the poll. But in any event, the supervisors and the managers at the facility were furloughed because of COVID. And so the leads were acting now as supervisors. And there was an interaction between a lead and an employee who really, before COVID, was a coworker, but now was really more of a person being supervised. And it was a very unfortunate incident that is going to make it very difficult for the company to manage because they didn't update any of the job descriptions. And so now they have to get outside employment counsel involved to try and unwind a very sticky situation, so that they don't get sued by one or more people within the building, right? So I would say that a very high priority should be, and I believe this is where I first crossed paths with you, Monica, was document, including job descriptions and wage and salary changes. All of that stuff needs to be documented very carefully, anticipatorily if possible, but certainly if it's already changed, then go ahead and make it fit whatever the situation is now. So that's, I think, an important part of kind of a CI practice, is knowing, you know, we all share responsibilities as part of that ideology, but also there are specific responsibilities that belong to people. So that's important. If you were recommending to people what to prioritize in their CI journey right now, what would it be? Panelists? Erin, what do you think? If you had to tell them, we're all spread very, very thin in HR, and I just told everybody they have to do job descriptions. So, now they're even spread thinner. What would you recommend be maybe the next step?
Well, I think, as with all things, to drive change, if you're not already doing this, it absolutely requires support from the top down. So, as HR people, a lot of times we just get to advocate for certain things, but you have to influence. If it's not happening, you have to influence the leadership team to align on CI. And, in our situation, right, money is more important than ever, right? Because it literally means people's jobs here. And so if we can find ways to trim, to save money, that has right now a huge impact on the business. So I just think getting alignment is critical.
Right. Missy, Julie, you have things to throw in about if you had to tell people one thing to focus on, if you had to narrow it down, what CI process would you focus on?
I still think it's the communication of it. Just as Aaron was alluding to, it's all about how we save the money, how we spend our dollar, things like that. There are times that I found that people are doing things wrong and they don't understand how what they're doing affects the bottom line or affects the next department, those kind of things. So really kind of sharing with them why we're doing things the way we're doing, how it's going to impact us, how it's going to affect the business, that communication as we're improving things, like here's what it hits, here's what it saves us, here's why we're doing it. All those open communication pieces are big.
And I think I would just add, one of the things that I think we noticed quite heavily, and you know this about your own organizations, and it all depends on where you're at in the journey, but where can you create automation, and where are you doing things that you just don't need to be doing anymore? And I think that's a lot of what we identified along the way. When we moved, as an example, our entire graphics team went to an automated process when we had to send them all remote. They didn't have the choice to fill out the document and hand it to the person sitting next to them and hand it to the person sitting next to them anymore. How long? We could have done that 5 years ago, right? I mean, it was like,
Right.
Nobody recognized that that simple thing created massive change for that entire department. They always use technology. They use their IAMs and all that good stuff, but now they're not. We got it down to, I think there's 2 touch points before a plate leaves the building. And it's cleaned down and wiped as it exits. And before, it used to go through 6, 7 sets of hands before that happened. So sometimes it's the low hanging fruit that you just don't recognize, that you could very easily go, if we just didn't do that anymore, how cool would that be? So try not to overthink it, I guess, would be my perspective, and see what the little pieces that you can do that make an impact, because sometimes they're rather big.
I want to toss a couple of things in here for people who don't know what continuous improvement is. It is as I said, an efficiency sort of way of thinking, and sort of not continuing to do things just because you always have mentality. There's tons of published work on there. The company that I think most famously exemplifies the sort of the beginning of that movement was Toyota, right? Isn't it Toyota? And then there are many companies that have embraced it since. I know our association, which you all are members of, has a continuous improvement conference every year. It's one of the best attended conferences we have, and they talk about all aspects, including HR, production, things like that. So there's a lot out there on CI if you're not familiar, and there's ways to familiarize yourself with it. We did have a question from Teresa Campbell to all the panelists and attendees. So attendees, if you want to answer, this is your chance to start talking in the chat. Do you feel the term continuous improvement helps production workers feel their jobs are more secure versus the term lean? And so just by way of information, lean is another way of referring to the continuous improvement process. Panelists, what say you? Monica, do you have experience with CI? Jump in.
Yeah, I would say, and to give a little, just real quick, I didn't say this at the beginning. I was in human resources before I became a lawyer, so I know what everybody's dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I'm just now on the other side of it. And what I would say about what I have learned through the pandemic, but I've been a big proponent of this because I have a background in business, right? The continuous improvement has been called 85,000 different things over the years. It's just something that every good company does a lot, and it includes succession planning and things along those lines. So to answer Teresa, I don't know what terms are less threatening to people, but if you communicate, and a lot of times it's going to come from the top down. You communicate to employees why you're looking at things. COVID is a very good example of why, because it was like, oh my gosh, all these little tiny cracks are now the Grand Canyon, and we had to look at them. Or going remote, and then all of a sudden you figured out you could automate, and then overnight everybody's like, oh my God, we should have done that yesterday. Those are the types of things that now that you, and I know everybody's busy, if you can take a minute to look back, document those, come up with and that'll help develop your business plan, or a succession plan, or a continuous improvement plan. And the end game is then to show people that, look at what we just got rid of. Like, just to use Julie's example, we're not doing this anymore, and yet nobody lost their job. right? So people will see, oh, okay, well, maybe I just shifted my duties a little bit, or I shifted my skill set. On the flip side of that is it helps the company recognize what skill sets you need, and therefore you can assess the current staff that you have and see if somebody in the current staff has that skill set. If there isn't anybody, then there might be a layoff or RIF, whatever you want to do. But when you have the documentation of how you got to figuring out that you don't need XYZ position, then you can defend any kind of a lawsuit that comes when there is a layoff, because somebody's can say age or race or whatever. And so it's important for a couple of reasons. From the legal perspective, it's very important to have documentation on the statistics of, you know, you went from here, you got rid of it, you went up here, you got this more money, blah, 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 so that you can defend a lawsuit. That would be my biggest thing, that it is worth the time to take to recognize the things that you have done to improve, and just jot it down. It doesn't have to be a treatise or a big book, but just write it down somewhere so that you can use it to defend your decisions later, should you have to lay people off.
And I think I would add to that and say, yeah, your biggest points around, because the language of continuous improvement, or lean, because you can put any label on it you want, can create fear if you don't give the end game in sight. If you don't talk about what the strategy is, how you want to get there, and why you want to get there, and get employees to understand. It's not about, your strategy might be to lay off people. That could definitely be your strategy. Then you find a way to communicate that. If your strategy is to add to the bottom line because of XYZ, then talk about that. I think from my perspective, it's really about a communication and ensuring they understand the why of what you're after.
You know, I'll pop in here. They're an example of an extremely successful employee-driven effort in the continuous improvement arena is from a company called Superior Lithographics in Los Angeles, and their owner, a guy named Doug Rawson, who did not have a CI program in place, decided, what the heck? He went to the CI conference and learned about it and thought, wow, I'm doing this. The motivation for his company was that they were in a band of profitability. So they just never seemed to, it was always within this band, good years and bad years, and they couldn't seem to bounce out of it and increase the profitability outside this band. So he went back and he handed over his keys to his operations guy, and he said, I'm handing you the keys to the kingdom. Do what you need to do to make this work. I want all the employees, we're a team, we're going to do it as a team. So there were no layoffs. There was a very effective communication. And the happy ending of that story is within 2 years, I think they had a 40% increase in profitability. And within 5 years, they had an 80% increase in profitability. So they broke really far outside the band by doing all that. Nobody lost their jobs because of that. And in fact, they ended up hiring more because they had more business. So the company grew very successfully under a CI program. But it was buy-in, right? Employee buy-in. I would also point out, I think that the concept of continuous improvement embraces basically best practices of everything, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea, is that you always work to achieve a best practice, and then that's always under evaluation to continue to be better. So our panel today is about best practices, and if you are on a CI path already, then this is going to continue to take you down there in every aspect of your business, right? You're going to, the production people are going to do their thing, but on an HR path, it will help you improve your hiring. It will help you improve your retention. It'll help you improve employee morale. There are lots of CI concepts and principles that do that. So it is kind of all the best practices thrown into a bucket, and that's CI. Is that what do you think, guys? Is that fair?
Yeah, if you do it right and you communicate, and if you do it right, you have a plan. some sort of written plan so that you can communicate effectively what that plan is, then I'm a big proponent of that. I think it does increase morale. It helps you defend yourself, and then it makes you more profitable in the end.
All right. So we have one more thing. I want to go around the horn and ask all of you. This is a surprise question to the panel. Kristen wants to know, what are we doing to make work more fun for our employees right now? I think that goes back to managing employee stress, right? But what are we doing now in this difficult time to try and, you know, lift the veil up a little bit and let some light in? Anybody want to start? Missy, I saw you laugh. That's going to be you then.
We have always had really, really fun employee events and have really embraced making it fun to be at work and at Sea Change. And I think that's been one of the hardest things for us, and not the hardest, but it's been a difficult thing to try to have those events that everybody looks forward to. How can we do those things? We've always had a, you know, bring your dog to work. Dogs are always welcome there. Well, I have a puppy. I can't bring a puppy to work because that's a COVID spreader, right? Like, all the puppy wants to do is lick everybody, right?
Right.
So there's been a lot of things that we've had to change that we have always done and have made us unique. Our company picnic, which has always been one of our biggest events, people from second and first shift playing games, bag toss, those kind of things. Well, that kind of wasn't an option this year. But we had a food truck that we spread everybody out. It was a longer version of a picnic. We had signs on the pavement that spread everybody out 6 feet, masked until they were eating, so many more tables for people to eat. And it's still at least like, get outside, take a break. It just looked so much different this year. So really re-looking at all of the events that people are looking forward to, and how can we give them a piece of that right now to bring some stress relief, to kind of encourage them to get through it, those kind of things. Whereas we used to, you know, I'm sure everybody here has done this, big pizza lunches when people have come the extra mile and they've done some overtime and they all want to have pizza. Like, that's just not an option. So what are the single serve foods we can do that we can separate between everybody to still give them that thank you, but maybe deliver it in a department without all that interaction, without having to have those big long lines where everybody's trying to get to the food while it's hot. We've just done a lot of really creative appreciation mini events, I'll call them, and spread out, and just a much different approach to it.
Excellent.
Question for you on that, Missy, with the food truck, how did you guys organize? I assume you have multiple shifts. First of all, did the company pay for it, or was it just an employee opportunity?
No, it was our, like, the spend we would normally have spent on a company picnic, we put towards that, right? And then we did spread everybody out in a much longer event. So it was, the food truck was there for a pretty long time, and we had multiple. So I myself started with the dessert food truck and then worked my way back to lunch at the very end. But we really just spread people out. And then it's hard to get a food truck there for a third shift when it's a smaller group of people. So we took orders in advance, placed all those orders, and got them exactly what they wanted with the menus. So just really kind of being creative and appreciating each shift. And we really had to spread things out. It took a lot longer, but.
And how many food trucks did you have?
2.
2 food trucks. Okay. So
2 food trucks.
You spread it out so the lines weren't crazy long, right? What I'm picturing is people want to order what they want, and it just takes time to get, through the line, but you spread it out so it wasn't a problem.
It was not a problem. We actually had a schedule. So if you were in this department, you were coming at this time. If you were in this area, you were coming at this time. So we really told everybody when to leave the building. So some are going in, they left on different doors, like the paths weren't the same. It just really is being creative with what you have and how you can kind of limit that. Like, how many dots did I have on the ground? Our stay 6 feet apart stickers that were on the pavement went around the building.
I think there's a little bit of genius in that, and having people go out separate doorways as well, right? Because you really, that's definitely a good idea. So you're not passing each other in the doorways, because that could be problematic. And did you do orders in advance or no? Did people know the menus and place their orders in advance and then just go pick it up during their time, or did they actually order at the food truck during their time?
No, they did order at the food truck so that they could have a nice hot meal as it came through. We've also done another one. We just wanted to do a quick appreciation. So I had a different food truck that was out at one door, and everybody had a scheduled time. I mean, I had them spaced out, and this was our first event we had after COVID, kind of just knowing how stressful it was on everybody. And I monitored the door. Like everyone who came out the door, I was like, here's your wet wipe, please wash your hands, please stay here. I mean, it was just it's just been different. I think it's a really fluid situation, and we really have spoken to our employees about how much we care about them. They clean their way in the building, they clean their way out of the building. Like nothing we tell them now is kind of a surprise. We're all with the same intent. And so when we schedule something for them, one, we all miss our big activities. So we're just so grateful for everything that comes up, that we're really conscientious about. Yep, it is a good idea to leave through this door. And we all have the same end goal. So everybody really works really well together to have those moments.
That's awesome.
It's been fun. I mean, in a weird way.
Julie, Aaron, you guys got any other suggestions about ways to maybe make work, brighten the mood a little bit?
A couple of things that we've done, I mean, outside of the food and ordering meals in for folks and acknowledging them, we did one fun thing for folks is we created a banner that they put up at each one of the facilities and had the supervisors individually acknowledge their teams on the banner so that when everybody walks by, they can actually see what their supervisors wrote about their team. So, and they could have wrote individual messages, group messages, whatever it was. So, and they of course spaced all that out, but it's a massive banner then that sits in the break room on a given day. We put care packages together as well for our employees that had hand sanitizer, masks, a bag to store things in, just goofy little stuff like that to just acknowledge that we're in a really awkward time at the moment and we want everybody to be healthy and safe, and it's part of our agenda. So that was well received as well. That was earlier on in the pandemic. But yeah, outside of that, I mean, I know we've had facilities trying to be creative with the food trucks and they were a little worried about entry and exit of the facilities. So I'll definitely pass that on to be able to use the front and back doors, if you will. So yeah.
Aaron, you guys bringing any new ideas to the table?
Yeah, so similar to Missy, we're pretty proud of our culture of engagement at Myers. We do just, we have an engagement committee and we do fun stuff all the time, and big summer picnic, big, Christmas dinner. And we haven't done any of those things. And so it is, I'm worried about kind of, the morale, not just for that reason, but it's part of it because we can't, get together like we always have. So the only thing that we have done in lieu of doing a summer picnic is we got Cold Stone Creamery gift cards for everybody. And we mailed those out with a nice letter from our CEO saying, hey, wish we could get together. It's a weird time. Please enjoy this, on us. And so overall, it was well received, right? I mean, who doesn't love a Cold Stone? I think everybody's got a Cold Stone in the state, right? So they know how good it is. But given our business status right now, we did get some feedback as well that, I'd rather have my original wage back than getting Cold Stone, right? So you're going to get some of that, but I think it was a good thing to do because we just haven't done much at all.
Yeah. I will share a couple of things. At the association at Printing United Alliance, we have a weekly email that goes out, and it has a theme, and everyone is invited to contribute a photograph of something. So for one time, it was your favorite coffee mug. The one that went out today was plants, greenery or plants. So it was inside plants or gardens. And there's been one every week. So you can imagine the themes are like, it's hard. Your pets, that was a very popular one, the pets. But we all feel a little bit more connected because we know something about each other, even though we're not there, right? I know some printing companies did at the beginning of the pandemic. I know a printing company that had, when toilet paper was very hard to come by, as was hand sanitizer and a bunch of things, companies that were able to source this. So somebody was able to source toilet paper. They got a pallet of it, and everybody at the company got a couple of rolls of toilet paper. It sounds crazy, but at the time it was a big deal and they felt very grateful that the effort had been made, right? So it can be the small things. So, and I think despite employee pushback, sending a card for ice cream during a summer is a wonderful gesture. Like that's a really, kind of meaningful thing, as well as all these other things you guys have done. So I think that's really, really nice.
One more thing I want to kind of throw out there to everybody is, as we all talk about being inclusive, it can't be just one person that's thinking of what do we need to boost morale, what does everybody need, because each shift, each department, each area might need something different. So when you build those committees and those teams, making sure that we've got a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different point of views, they just bring up those pinch points. Like we got to make sure we're using all different doors. What's our schedule going to be? All those things that maybe one person couldn't think of, every area does. And then, with somebody who wishes they had not gotten that Cold Stone Creamery gift card, there's enough people that are like, well, this was well thought out, that appreciation level when you've included somebody from everywhere. Sometimes the employees will step in and be like, dude,
right.
I love the Cold Stone, something like that. I think that's just great to just include lots of perspectives.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else want to toss anything out there? And if not, I think we might wrap up. Okay. I want to thank all the panelists because you're awesome. And I know that you run great HR departments and are really sharp. And so thank you for this really engaging discussion. I hope that people have been able to get some ideas for best practices on the various issues. Don't forget to check your resources tab, but I believe Kristen did email out the stuff in there to everybody. And just as you guys know, I am a service to members, so you can reach out to me out there in listener land if you have questions. I know that I really enjoy, and probably my favorite part of my job is engaging with members. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. And if you don't have my information, printing.org, you'll find it. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Yes, the HR listserv is probably one of the most popular things for all PIM and PI Mid-America members and all of PI or Printing United members. So thank you. I watch it every day, and it's sometimes dramatic and sometimes comedic, but you are so helpful. It's such a great service for us. And then I just want to let everybody know now that we are going to start back up at 3 o'clock. So go check those emails, go take a little break, get another cup of coffee, a cocktail. I'm just kidding. But anyway, and
that
thank
makes
you
work fun, Kristen.
And thank you to the panel. You guys were really, full of information. We really appreciated Julie, Missy, Monica, Aaron, and I think that's all. So thank you for participating, and we'll see you at 3 o'clock where we're going to talk about developing talent. And we have some community partners that we get to talk to and listen to about how we can work with them to find new paths and new people to enter the print industry. Thank you. We'll be back at 3.
Bye, everybody.